2018 was a whirlwind of exciting new cameras for video shooters on almost any budget. Today we're going to talk about what was the cream of the crop. Welcome to the TED 2018 Camera Award. What's up everyone, I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. So many good cameras came out this year, so darn many. And it's going to be hard to narrow down which ones did better overall than another. So what we're going to do today is separate the overall camera marketplace into three separate subsections: budget, mid-ranged, and high-end. And another caveat is it has to be a camera I've used this year. I'm not going to make claims or recommend something that I haven't personally used. And another fun caveat, this is my standard disclaimer, I'm not a photographer or a professional videographer, so I judge these cameras solely on their capabilities for making online videos. Without further ado, let's talk about budget cameras first. And when I say budget, these aren't cheap by any stretch of the imagination, but in the camera world, these are more friendly to your wallet, and this is probably the toughest category for somebody to do well with anymore. You know, with how good cell phones and other cameras are getting, it kind of feels like it's just a matter of time before this category fades away entirely. Change my mind in the comments, right? Let's have the three finalists come to the stage. My favorite three budget cameras of 2018, drumroll please, the Sony HX99, the GoPro Hero 7 Black, and the Canon M50. Again, I'm judging these video capabilities for online content, so the fact that these are three separate types of cameras doesn't really bother me in the slightest. I'm just wild like that. The Sony HX99 is a point-and-shoot camera that has a crazy huge zoom range. It records up to 4K 30 frames per second and uses micro SD cards. That's still weird. It's like a smaller version of the RX100 series of cameras, but frankly, it's pretty darn good for the $450 price tag. The GoPro Hero 7 Black is the current version of the top-shelf action camera from GoPro. It has an undescribed number of specs because GoPro doesn't release that information. It can record and stabilize up to 4K 60 frames per second, and can do some super slow motion of 1080p up to 240 frames per second, which I personally use a lot. And the $400 entry is steep for an action camera, but worth it in my books. And last but certainly not least, the Canon M50. This is actually the least capable resolution-wise camera in the category today. It can record up to 4K 24 frames per second, but does so with a huge crop and without Canon's famous dual pixel autofocus. Where it makes up for this is having a nice 1080p image, an APS-C size sensor, a fully articulating touchscreen, and a microphone in jack. The M50 crams an awful lot of usability into its $599 asking price. Before I announce the winner, I do want to give a runner-up award to a late entry, the Osmo Pocket. The DJI Osmo Pocket is also a small sensored camera, but it uniquely comes with its own built-in gimbal, and it is shockingly small. It has some incredible rare features like face tracking. I mean, I don't mean like it has a box, I mean it actually tracks your face. Super stabilization and 4K 60 frames per second mechanically stabilized. The reason it's not on this list, however, is it has some pretty striking flaws. Most notably for me is the fact that the autofocus, yes, it has a depth of field, doesn't work very well when face tracking a subject, which is like the whole point of the camera. It also doesn't have a replaceable battery or a standard tripod adapter. So those are some problems that kept it off this list. So who wins my favorite budget camera of the year? Well, it was closer than I actually thought it would be, but I'm gonna give it to the Canon M50, though seriously the GoPro Hero 7 Black is one of my most used cameras this year. I mean, I use it almost more than any other camera. However, the M50 has value for days. It's basically a very reasonably priced way into the Canon ecosystem of lenses, accessories, dual pixel autofocus, etc. It can work fully well as a YouTube camera in its own right, and I will continue to recommend this into 2019. Next up, mid-range cameras. When I say mid-ranged, I mean anything from the $600 ceiling for the budget and all the way up to a high, but I think still manageable, $1,500. This is actually where the competition got fierce this year. Some truly remarkable video cameras came out this year in this price range, and it was really hard to narrow it down to my three favorites. But sometimes, you know, part of being adult is you just have to make decisions. My three favorite mid-range cameras from 2018, the Fuji XT3, the Lumix G9, and the RX100 5 Alpha. Yeah, okay, that's cheating a bit. The Fuji XT3 was probably the sole sleeper hit camera of the year. It had almost no fanfare, got very little pre-release coverage, and then blew all of our minds when we got a hold of it. It has an APS-C sensor, can record up to 4K 60 frames per second, has an insane amount of recording bitrate options, Fuji's film simulation, and some awesome continuous video autofocus. And the Fuji XT3 comes in at a very reasonable $1,500. The Lumix G9 is marketed as a photographer's camera, but does so much more than that. It has a micro four thirds sensor, can also record in 4K 60, has some of the best stabilization on the market, a fully articulating touchscreen, and has some video recording assistant features that other video cameras don't have. It punches so far above its $1,200 price tag. And thirdly, the RX100V Alpha. Now, I said before this was a bit of a cheat because it's not much different than the 2-year-old RX100V, but it's new and was released this year, so that definitely counts. The 5 Alpha does have a few updates from the 5, but what was awesome then is still awesome now. A 1-inch sensor, a 24 to 70mm equivalent zoom, 4K up to 30 frames per second, awesome autofocus, 1080p at up to 240 frames per second. This is basically an all-in-one video package that just makes it hard for anything else to come into the market at this price point. You basically get an all-in-one solution for everything at the $900 price tag. Man, 2018 was such a great year for cameras. At the end of the day though, nothing in this class comes close to the Fuji X-T3. Legitimately, I'm shocked that this thing exists and that it does so at its price point. The colors are great, the battery grip is awesome, and it's almost cinema camera levels of quality for a mid-range entry. I cannot recommend the X-T3 highly enough. Whew, okay. Now it's time for the big boys, the high-end cameras that will cover the $1,500 and up price points. Now, while I've dabbled with a cinema camera for a few weeks, I generally don't look at too many super high-end cameras because they are generally more stills-oriented A7R III, Z7, but I did look at 3 this year, which perfectly works out for the 3 finalists. So the finalists, by nature of attrition, are the Canon EOS R, the Sony A7iii, and the Nikon Z6, which we're currently recording on. Yup, 3 full-frame cameras with full-frame prices. Now, I do hope to check out the GH5S sometime early next year, but as I haven't used it yet, it doesn't get to be added here. The EOS R is a hotly debated camera in the internet spheres right now. It comes in with basically the same full-frame sensor from the older 5D Mark IV. It can record in up to 4K 30 frames per second with a 1.8 times crop, and that 4K can be sent 10-bit through a recorder. When it comes to slow motion, it's pretty rough and can only do 720p at up to 120 frames per second. Another heated issue is its single SD card slot. But with those negatives, it does have a fully articulating touchscreen and Canon's class-leading dual pixel autofocus. Overall, I actually like the EOS R. It has one of the best builds of any camera I've ever held, and the image quality coming out of it is actually pretty darn good. Single card slot versus dual card slot doesn't really matter to me, so I think this is a decent camera with much too high of a price tag of $2,300. The Sony A7iii it literally changed the market when it was released earlier this year. It changed the full frame landscape by having a full sensor width, 4K 24 frames per second, 1080p up to 120 frames per second full sensor width. It has dual SD card slots, in-body image stabilization, another darn near best-in-class phase detection autofocus system, and access to some of the best lenses made this year. I mean, most of the good lenses this year were with Sony E-mount. The Tamron 20-75 is actually my favorite lens of the year. There is a small crop on 4K 30 frames per second, and the IBIS isn't that great, but the A7iii changed what is now expected of a camera at the $2,000 price point. Much like the Fuji XT3, the Nikon Z6 was kind of a sleeper hit. Its more expensive brother, the Z7, got all the press coverage and came out first. The Z6 felt like more of a side story than the main one, but the smaller megapixel count at 24 is actually way more suited for video than you might think. It has a full sensor width 4K 30 frames per second and can record that in 10-bit out to an external recorder. That's something you don't see again until much higher price cameras. I mean like 30 grand cameras. Like the other cameras, it also has phase detection autofocus that's really good, and it has some amazing in-body image stabilization. It is limited by its native lenses, as there's only 3 right now, and has an expensive single card recording media, XQD, but personally this is the camera I use, and I'm quite taken with it. Wow, that sounds like this category has some unfair personal bias into it. And you know what? I'm a human being. Everything I do is covered by my own internal biases. humanity. So the winner of the high-end camera this year is the Nikon. Nope. It's actually the A7 III. I know, right? If it wins this category, why aren't you using it, Ted? Well, personally, I like the Z6 more than the A7 III, but you can absolutely argue that the Z6 would not exist at its current price point without the A7 III. The A7 III is more than just a spec sheet of a camera. It's more than just a sensor. It's more than the camera itself. It quite literally will change all of our expectations in a $2,000 camera. It will affect R&D for future systems, prices for near-term systems, and is absolutely one of the best video cameras ever made. I have no problem saying that, and that's why this wins my high-end camera of the year. It's so good, but what it stands for is even better. With the 3 categories out of the way, what is my winner of the overall camera of the year? Well, before we get to the camera winner, let's talk about some non-camera gear that I really liked from 2018. The best audio recorder of the year for me is the brand new Zoom H1n. It's an update to the original Zoom H1 that was released back in the hinterlands of 2010, but the H1n works great. If you are hearing audio during a camera test on my channel that isn't from the camera itself, chances are it's coming from this. It's super small, sounds great, I carry it with me everywhere. My favorite lens of the year, I don't have it on me right now unfortunately to physically show you, is the Tamron 28-75. It works perfectly with the A7 III, looks great, is a 2.8 full frame lens that isn't that much bigger than an APS-C lens. I mean, it is absolutely my favorite lens of all time, and I really hope an equivalent comes out for the Nikon Z6. My favorite drone of the year is the DJI Mavic Air. For the price, features, and size, it's amazing. No kidding, you can get one now for around $600, and it does 4K 30 frames per second, fits almost in your pocket, and has one of the most durable gimbals I've ever seen. It's so good. And the best camera accessory of the year, hands down, it's not even close, is the Atomos Ninja V. This 5-inch monitor not only allows you to record externally to a solid-state drive, but gives even non-video cameras functionality like false color, focus peaking, etc. It also has an audio in jack, so if your camera doesn't have one, like the RX100VA Alpha, you can actually add an audio in to your footage, which I mean is frankly amazing for the size. I basically no longer consider my camera the center part of my video system. No kidding, it is now the Ninja V. I cannot get over how much I like it and how good it is. If you make video, you should absolutely get one. Again, this was a fantastic year for cameras, and anything on this list would serve you well. The best part of 2018 is there is not a bad choice at almost any price point. After we sort through this mountain of awesomeness, I do think there is a clear winner. My overall camera of the year is the... Can you hear that? The Fuji XT3. Like, hands down, it's the Fuji XT3. It's just such a shocking achievement and piece of video kit. It can record in ways that almost nothing else in its price range can. It has a huge sensor, awesome autofocus, one of the best feeling camera bodies ever, and is at such a reasonable price point, it will also change what we expect out of mid-range cameras and cameras that come out above it. It deserves way more press coverage than it actually gets, and I don't know how something in 2018 could top it, but I'm excited to see them try. What are your camera/video gear of the year? Leave a comment below and let's have a debate. Thanks for watching.